Welcome to Healing Childhood Trauma, the podcast for millennial women who are ready to heal from the past. Here, we have the deeper discussions on emotional well-being and practical tips that will empower you to transform your relationships and underlying anxiety from insecure to secure attachment. I'm Lysandra, your host and psychotherapist. I'm a little bit obsessed with human development, deep conversations, and finding the lesson even in the most challenging of circumstances. I'm very happy to have you with me on this journey of self-discovery where we unpack the past and heal in the present. Hello, my lovely, and welcome to the episode today. I'm going to be getting into why therapy might not have worked for you, or why it didn't have the outcome that you were hoping for. And if you've never had therapy before, maybe this will give you a bit of insight as to what to look for when you're starting your own therapy journey. And maybe if you've had therapy before and you've had maybe an experience that felt a little bit lackluster or it didn't have the result that you were hoping for, I think this episode is also going to give you a bit of insight into why that might be and potentially what you can look out for so that your therapy journey and your experience of therapy, you can really make the most out of, because there might have just been some things that you were not aware of that made it difficult for you to actually fully get the benefits of therapy. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. And it's been about a month since I've recorded any episodes. In fact, it's probably a bit longer because it's been about a month since I've uploaded any episodes. And so this is the first episode back. Well, potentially, I actually recorded something yesterday, but it was very rushed. And to be honest with you, I'm not even sure if it's going to see the light of day. But this one is going to go much better, I'm sure of it, because I'm coming to this episode a little bit more, well, less rushed. And I might sound a little bit groggy because I'm trying to fight off a cold at the moment. So I am here. It's actually the morning that I'm recording this. I've got my honey and lemon. I've got my comfy jumper on. And it's just chill vibes today. So wherever you are in the world listening to this, welcome. This might very well be your very first introduction to me. And if so, I will tell you a little bit about me, just in case you are thinking, well, who is this person and why should I listen to them about therapy? Well, I'm Lysandra and I'm a psychotherapist, and I have been a therapist for over 10 years. I work with relational trauma, and so a lot of the clients that I see are coming to me based off of things around childhood trauma, which is also obviously the name of this podcast, Healing Childhood Trauma. So it's based off of my clinical experience and also my personal experience. And while I am recording these episodes, I am very much still in the field of working one-to-one with many of my clients who are currently going through a lot of the type of topics that I cover in this podcast. So there is so much learning that you can actually get from these episodes, and I don't really hold anything back. So if you're listening and you're paying attention, there is a lot of therapeutic value that you will get in listening to this podcast. But as always, I have to give a caveat that listening to podcasts does not equate to therapy. So just because you are getting some kind of therapeutic value and you are learning more about yourself and it's part of your journey of self-discovery and learning more about yourself and your patterns, it's not the same thing as therapy, babes, okay? So I just want you to bear that in mind, and that's always something that I just need to make you aware of. But before we get into why therapy might not have worked for you, I've got a bit of a milestone that I would love to share with you about this podcast, and that is that we have been hitting over 10,000 downloads of the podcast from all over the world. I think it's over 100 countries and territories and over 1,000 different cities. So if you have been listening to the previous episodes, thank you so much for being part of this journey with me. When I initially started this podcast, I wasn't sure how far I was going to get. I wasn't sure about the format, but I think I'm kind of easing into things now. And so initially I was doing series, as in series 1, and then I'll do series 2, but I just decided to scrap that, okay? Because it's making things more complicated than they need to be. And so I like the simple life and I like things to feel as easy as possible. So in order for me to continue to make these episodes alongside being a therapist and actually doing the work of seeing clients, while also being an adult, human, adulting, life and all that other stuff. I'm just going to stick to weekly sessions. So I'm saying weekly sessions because I'm so used to saying that as a therapist. I mean weekly podcast episodes, but with taking intentional breaks. So when there is a break coming up, actually you might not get a heads up, I'm not going to lie to you. I might just decide one day, actually I need a break, because that's my right to do so. And I want you to also model that in whatever aspect of life that you need to. So it's important to take the necessary breaks when you need to. So that's kind of what I do with this podcast. That doesn't mean that I'm going to be taking, 20 million breaks. It just means that it's going to be intentional. So when it feels like it's becoming too much, I'm not going to force my way through recording podcast episodes, because I think you can kind of hear if the person who is on the other end of the mic is not really feeling it and they're just doing it for the sake of doing it. And that's not really my vibe. And that's also not really great for your nervous system to keep pushing through when things are not right for you. So you can tell I'm a therapist, right? Because I will find the deeper meaning in practically anything. And so I'm finding the deeper meaning in podcast episodes right now. So that gives you a bit of insight into the kind of therapist that I am. That being said, the milestone that I want to get back into is just the fact that I've got 10,000 downloads, and I am hoping to get to the next 10,000 very soon with your help. So if you have been listening to the episodes, thank you so much. Please continue to rate, review the episodes, subscribe, share episodes with a friend if you find them helpful. Share the word, share the knowledge, because the more people that know about healing childhood trauma, the better we can all be, the better we can all be in our own healing journeys and moving on and having healthier, happier, more sustainable relationships. So that's my goal. Right, so let's make this about you. So why therapy might not have worked for you is perhaps you wanted to fix your 20 years of trauma in 2 months. Which I totally get. By nature, we want things to be fixed. We want to be better. We want to feel well. And sometimes we can do that with somewhat of an unrealistic expectation, because we can't fix 20 years of trauma in a couple of months. As much as I wish that was the case, and I wish that I could help clients to speed through the process, but speeding through the process of trauma actually isn't very helpful for you, and it isn't actually trauma informed, and your body, your brain, your nervous system will just reject being almost pushed and forced through the trauma rather than coming through it with somewhat of an ease to it. Now that doesn't mean that your journey through therapy will be easy, but it's not about pushing yourself and forcing your way through the process and forcing your way to healing. Often what I see in where therapy hasn't necessarily been successful is that sometimes you can put a time limit on there, and sometimes that time limit is necessary because there might be financial constraints, for example, or there might be time constraints or whatever that idea that you have in your mind of, I've only got, say, for example, in the NHS, you might only have a certain amount of sessions. So typically in the NHS, you might get 6 to 12 sessions. And so you might have that in your mind of when you're going to therapy that, 6 to 12 sessions, that's enough because that's what's offered on the NHS. But that isn't necessarily all that conducive to healing. And I just kind of want to acknowledge that obviously being in therapy and private therapy as well is being in a place of privilege, right? And it's not accessible for everyone. And it is expensive. It's a time expense and it's a financial expense. So it's not to negate that in any way. But I do still find that sometimes when people think that therapy hasn't worked for them, a big factor in that is because they haven't actually given themselves enough time to actually go through that process, and they've put a limitation on themselves, and maybe an unrealistic expectation not only on themselves but also on the therapist to almost be in a position to fix them. And as a therapist, and I think any therapist will probably tell you this, it's not their job to fix you, but they can most definitely facilitate and support you in that process of healing, no matter what modality or what type of theory they are trained in. And that actually leads me nicely on to point number 2, which is maybe the training that your therapist had didn't quite match with what it is that you wanted or what you needed from therapy. There are loads of different approaches that therapists use and that they are trained in potentially. And I couldn't possibly list what they all are because there really are so many, and more different approaches are coming out all the time, and people are repackaging and rebranding previous theoretical approaches. And so some therapists have an approach of being more passive in the process of therapy. In our world, we'll call it client-centered. And essentially it's being person-centered, and a person-centered approach is, on the outside, probably looks like being more passive. It's being very reflective back of what you're sharing with them. So if you're talking about something specifically, it's kind of just like mirroring and staying very closely to what you're talking about, and not really going off and having your own agenda as a therapist, but just staying with whatever the client brings. And so if you talk about something specific, it will be unpacking that specific thing. And the therapist won't say, okay, I think we need to talk about your childhood, or we need to talk about this. It's being very authentic to whatever the client brings. And it's very powerful work, but it's not for everyone. And although I might use elements of that depending on the client, it's not something that I find particularly helpful as someone who is in therapy. So if I was to go to therapy, I wouldn't find that approach very helpful for me, and that is a personal preference. But I think people who are not familiar in the world of therapy don't really realize that there could be a potential preference for the way that your therapist works. And so some people prefer to have the space to be able to just kind of process their thoughts aloud as they're having them. And for other people, that just might feel really scary. That might feel like it's almost like it's too vast, it's too open. And so there are other approaches to therapy that are a little bit more proactive, and it's really in there with you. You might have more tools, you might have more solutions, you might have more insights. Obviously, if you are going to therapy and you are somebody who wants more from your therapist, someone to kind of be in that with you, rather than you kind of feeling like, okay, you're literally just reflecting back what I just said and I need a little bit more than that, that style isn't going to work for you. So it's also useful to either ask the therapist what their approach is and how they tend to work with their clients, just to see if it's a good fit for you. And the thing that can make or break therapy is that if there is a mismatch with your therapist. And so not only do you have to feel comfortable and safe, you have to really have some kind of the way that they work has to really also work with you. And from my own experience, I'm an integrative therapist, and that basically means that I'm trained in different approaches, and so I can adapt based on the person and the individual and the circumstances. And I think for me, while I was training, the beauty of that is that you can either be more passive at times and allow the client to come to their own conclusions and support them in their journey to doing that, or you can really get stuck in there and be like, okay, these are what boundaries are, and this is what it looks like, and have you thought about how that might be impacting your relationships, and really getting clients to just see patterns that they don't generally tend to see. So if you are looking for a therapist and you've got the mental capacity to do so, sometimes when you are looking for a therapist, you might not even be in a good headspace to even do all of this research. But if you are coming at it from a place of like, I'm doing okay, but there's just some things in my life that I want to work on, which is also enough of a reason to go to therapy for, by the way. There is no such thing as being too well for therapy. If you want to learn more about yourself, therapy is a great space for you to be able to do that. But if you do have the bandwidth, just have a little look into the different types of therapy and think about what you might prefer as a style of working. And that can also help you to narrow it down when you are looking for a therapist, because I know that when you are looking for a therapist, it can feel quite daunting that there's so many different people to choose from and so many different options, basically. And so having a bit of an idea of what you might prefer can actually help to make a decision and make an informed decision about the kind of therapist that you want to see. And now the third reason why therapy perhaps might not have worked for you is that you showed up for the therapeutic hour that you had with your therapist, and then you went on your merry way and you lived your life, and you didn't really give it much of a second thought because you thought that having that 1 hour therapy was enough to do the work. And again, I'm going to hold your hand when I say this. Being in therapy is such a small amount of time out of your week that it's not just about showing up for that therapy hour. It's also about what you do outside of therapy. It's implementing some of the things that you're learning in therapy. And that is specific to if there is a certain change or a certain outcome that you're trying to make in your life. So if you are in a place of being stuck, or you're in a place of you don't like where you are, and that's the reason you're going to therapy, and then you talk it through in that therapy hour, it equates to less than 1% of your time. So to expect massive change out of just doing that 50 minutes, which typically a therapy session tends to be 50 minutes, or it might be a full hour, but that's all the time that you're giving to that change. And while therapy is incredibly powerful and incredibly useful, it's not a miracle worker. You have to also be making changes outside of therapy in order to implement what you're learning in therapy. And sometimes if you're not doing that, and maybe there are reasons why you're not doing that, and maybe that's something worth just asking yourself about, well, what might be happening there? But that can be a reason why you're not necessarily making the progress that you would want to make. And sometimes you can end up blaming the therapy when actually, my friend, you might need to hold a bit more responsibility around that. And it's not coming from a place of blaming or shaming. It's just recognizing your patterns and recognizing accountability for yourself when it needs to be there. Because that's also part of healing, right? We can't always just be told, yes, you're amazing, even though, yes, you probably are very much amazing and fantastic. But there might also be ways that you are self-sabotaging your healing journey. And then this final point, I don't think is spoken about enough, or it probably is spoken about, but I'm going to come at it from a different way. And that is when there is a rupture in the relationship with your therapist. And so inevitably, what can and most likely will happen is your therapist is going to fuck up, right? Your therapist is probably going to say something or do something that is going to trigger in you those core wounds, whether it is abandonment, rejection, fear of being forgotten, whatever the thing is that you're coming to therapy for. It's also very possible that that same pattern will be reenacted in your relationship with your therapist. And I have to give a disclaimer on that. It's very possible also that your therapist is shit. I'm not going to lie to you. There's a lot of charlatan therapists out there, or well-meaning therapists out there, or therapists who just make mistakes that there is no comeback from. However, the point of relationships is that there are going to be ruptures and there are going to be disagreements, and the therapy space is no different from that. And I don't think people are necessarily aware that how they then work through getting through that rupture, overcoming the discomfort in that relationship, and actually perhaps even voicing their concerns, letting their boundaries be known, telling their therapist how they upset them or hurt them, that there is so much healing that can come from that. And that is part of the journey of therapy. As long as you are not in any danger emotionally or physically, it is worth kind of sticking the course with that therapist, because there is so much learning that you can actually get from the relational experience that you're having with your therapist, which is more of a safer, contained environment, providing it is a safe space. Because again, I just want to do a disclaimer that just because someone is a therapist, it doesn't necessarily make them a safe person. But if you can recognize that actually it is a safe person, they've just made a mistake, which a therapist is bound to at some point, because we are also human. And if the thing you are coming to therapy for gets reenacted during the therapeutic process, that's like the crux of what therapy is. And I don't think people realize that. And I don't think we talk about that enough. So if you do have some kind of rupture or some kind of misunderstanding, miscommunication, it is so worth trying to stay the course and trying to work it through with your therapist, because there is so much healing that can be done through that and learning about yourself in action. And sometimes I think a natural reaction to a therapist pissing you off, perhaps maybe they enforce their cancellation policy and they charge you for cancelling late, and that just rubs you up the wrong way because it feels like it's unempathic and it feels unfair, and there's all of these other feelings that come up around it. It's really useful to actually bring that to therapy. That is a very useful bit of work. And if there is a therapist you are thinking of working with, it's very likely that they do an intro call, and that's something that I do as well. I do like a 15-20 minute intro call with potential clients just to see if we are a good fit to work together and to make sure that I can actually support them with what it is that they want help with. And it's also just like a vibe check, just to see if the vibe is good or if it just feels like it's misaligned for some reason. And having that first intro call really does help you to get a sense of whether or not you actually like being in a space with a person, or if it just feels like, I don't know, something's off or something just doesn't feel quite comfortable. And that is something that many therapists offer. So it's always important to do your due diligence, and doing a little bit of research doing a little bit of research really will help you to make the most of your therapy experience. And if you are curious about working with me, you can check out the show notes, and there will be some links in there to check out my website and to connect with me over on Instagram and TikTok, where I share a lot of content around childhood trauma healing, relationship patterns, boundaries, people pleasing, and all things to help you along your healing journey. Thank you so much for listening today, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye. Thank you for joining this episode of Healing Childhood Trauma. I hope you found today's discussion insightful and empowering. Remember, healing is a journey and you are not alone on this path. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favourite podcast platform. And you can share this episode with a friend. Your feedback helps this podcast to reach more women who are ready to heal and build secure, healthy relationships and heal from the past.